Hello again everyone, and welcome to my second video on the PAX East footage. I mentioned in my last video that I had cut a bunch of content because I didn't feel like it provided new information or contributed to the overarching story, but I also mentioned if you wanted me to talk about it or anything else, to let me know, and based on the reception I got in the comments, a couple of you had mentioned that you would love to have seen it. So, this is the cut content from the PAX East video. Like I said, a lot of this isn't new story stuff. I'll probably end up explaining, so if you have questions about some of the stuff that was shown in the trailers that I didn't talk about in the last video, then this is the video for you. There's also a couple things that are new, but they don't really add to the overarching story that I think are interesting, so hopefully you'll find those interesting too. So, the first trailer opens with Clive being angsty and talking to Sid about his life. How he has killed countless men and suffered basically by being a slave for the Empire. Now, this scene is almost certainly right after Clive and Sid arrive at Sid's hideaway, as it's really Clive introducing himself to Sid and giving his backstory. And he has the Imperial armor to match. The scene really provides characterization for Clive, but it doesn't really give us much more information than that. The next scene is actually really interesting because it is new, and what we see here are Clive, Torgal, and Sid approaching some lookouts standing near a cliff. Based on the armor of the men on the cliff, I believe these are Imperial soldiers, but based on what's happening in the story, they could be Waloed soldiers. And my guess is they're heading to the castle that Benedicta and the Icon of Fire are at. In fact, it looks like it's just about sunset, which would be perfect for a nighttime raid on the castle. We then cut to Clive beating up some more Imperial soldiers by himself in a similar environment. However, he uses Remu's power, and based on the armor Clive is wearing, I think this is early game, and what's likely going on is the devs are playing on a New Game Plus or using dev tools to use different icon abilities during this section. We then cut to Clive fighting what appears to be an assassin. Now my guess this might be a Waloed assassin, but it could be Imperial, just like the previous scene. This again is happening very early in the game though, as we see Sid, Clive, and Torgal with Clive in his Imperial armor. It's hard to say, but my guess, based on levels, this force kind of takes place as we're heading out to the castle of Benedicta, just a bit earlier than that cliff scene that we saw. The next scene is then a scene of Clive fighting a Curl, which we saw in a previous trailer as well. This is likely a Dhalmekian soldier letting it loose on us while we're in Rosaria. In fact, in the gameplay demo that Yoshi P played on stage at PAX, he fought a Curl in Dhalmekia, so they're native to Dhalmekia, so that makes sense. Then there's the Hugo half-human fight, which I also believe happens in Rosaria. Remember, we don't actually have the brand here, so it's likely that we go to Drake's Breath before we face our past with Joshua. We then get to a very popular scene from this trailer. Now, I want to leave your interpretations up to you, but let me give you some background to what I think is going on in the scene. Basically, this scene has to happen right after we get back to the hideaway with Sid after fighting Benedicta. We know that Jill doesn't come with us to fight Benedicta, likely because she's unconscious from fighting Hugo and Titan, as we saw her being carried by a big man in a previous trailer. That and Clive in the scene still has his Imperial armor on. What this means is that it's very likely that this is the first real conversation that these two have had in over a decade, and not just that, this is likely one of the only childhood friends Clive has left in the world, and they're reunited and about to go on an adventure together. Many people have talked about how this is one of the only scenes where Clive is happy, and through this lens, I think it makes a lot of sense. This is basically Clive reuniting with a long-lost childhood friend who he thought was dead, and then awkwardly trying to find common ground with them as you kind of start this journey together. Again, maybe he's flirting a little bit, maybe there's a little bit of romance there, that's yet to be seen, but contextually, I think this is definitely more Clive just being awkward, not knowing what to say to this person who he hasn't talked to in over a decade. After this, we then cut to the icon part of the trailer. The first part of it is Ifrit howling, which is hard to place anywhere, but my guess is Rosaria maybe, based on the tower, but that's a rough guess. Plus, while we're here, just a little reminder of the little red star next to the moon. That tends to be kind of important in Final Fantasy stories. We then get to the Ifrit Garuda fight, which we've seen its entirety already, so there's nothing to say here. There's then a scene with Joshua screaming as he charges up an attack to try to kill the enemy Ifrit, only for the attack to be turned back on him and one-shot him. This is a stage lost scene, and it's in the intro of the game, right after the Empire invades and Joshua transforms and then fights the Hooded Man, who transforms into Ifrit. This scene actually is likely what sets Clive on his path of revenge, as he probably witnesses this. We then get a snippet of Titan, Titan Lost, and Typhon. All of these fights I talk about in a lot more detail in my previous video. I think one cool thing we do see here though is Ifrit charging up a big fire attack at the end, which gives big Spirit Bomb energy. And really goes to show how much more control Clive has than in the initial Garuda fight. Now, on to the next trailer. Since this is an environmental trailer, I'll probably just point out where these places are and if there's any important context as to what's going on. And in fact, there's one mysterious thing I noticed, and maybe you can tell me about it. And so with that, let's get going. We open with Clive, Jill, and Torgal looking out over the crater where we saw Yoshi P started playing the gameplay demo from at PAX. If you want to know more about this location, you can check out my other video, where I talk about it more in depth. This then cuts to Clive walking through some wetlands with a bridge and some buildings up on a cliff. Because of the wetlands, we can place this in Rosaria. Where it is unknown, but it will likely be one of the towns on the map. Also, I'm going to pause quickly. I noticed this giant tower thing on the left that's only here for a few frames, and honestly, I'm not sure what it is. Maybe ancient or crystal related? If you have any guesses, you can let me know. We then go to some Dalmekian cities and towns, and we go through their bazaars. I don't think these are both the same town, although I could be wrong. Really, all they're trying to show here is the life in the world. We then cut to a forest, which we also saw in the last trailer, and I went over. Again, this is likely in Imperial lands, and where we go when we're on our way to the Castle of Benedicta. Then there are some rundown docks, which aren't super interesting story-wise, but they are nice looking. This is followed by a large wheat field, which is just outside the main city of Sambrique. I think the most important thing here is if this screenshot is representative of an open field area for Sambrique, will it extend all the way up to the main city gates? If so, I have to wonder in what context Clive would be able to walk up to the main gates of the capital of Sambrique, being the wanted man that he is. You would think an obvious man with a brand on his face, or maybe a burned brand on his face, would draw some suspicion in the Imperial lands, where he was a slave. Then there's a landscape shot of some island, a bridge, and a city in the distance with some fallen ruins in the water. This again is likely in Rosaria, given the biome and the abundance of water. And the city in the distance, I'm not positive what it is, but it looks relatively major, and part of me wonders if it is the capital city of the kingdom. We then see Clive walking through some ancient ruins, which this serves to remind us the importance of the ancients and emphasizes that we should probably be paying attention to them. Then there's the shot of Waloed's mother crystal and the city at its base. I've mentioned this before, but I really do think Drake's spine, which is Waloed's mother crystal, is lightning aspected. There's some debate if it's dark or lightning, but given that it's always stormy here and the random lightning bolts as we're running, I really think it is lightning aspected. Also, the horse statue is likely a reference to Sleipnir, I'd wager, Odin's horse. This is then followed by a shot of Drake's fang in Dalmekia. Like I mentioned in my last video, part of me wonders if our fight with Titan Lost actually blew the top off this mountain, as it looks like it might be missing, but maybe it's just hidden from view with the ring around the top. We then see some ancient ruins where someone built some scaffolding or maybe even houses around it. It's possible that maybe impoverished people of this world flee to the ruins where they can make a home, or maybe this is some research excavation. We then see a rare scene with young Clive in what looks like Rosaria's castle gardens, along with some beautiful architecture. Obviously, with it being young Clive, this happens early in the game. This next scene is one that piques some curiosity as we see Clive running to a catacomb or cave, which at least reminds me of Elden Ring. It makes us ask if there will be a few hidden locations around the map. We then see the outside of the volcano that is Drake's breath, and I find it interesting that we see these glowy spots all over. My guess is that these are items on the trail that are left for us to pick up. This then cuts to the inside of the volcano. This level gives a huge dungeon feel, and I'm pretty positive that this will be a stage where we're not really free to roam, but it's a set mission that is more linear, less wide. This would be, of course, similar to Benedicta's mission. And at the end of it, we see the glow of the mother crystal at the top. The next scene is one that I showed briefly in my last video. Basically, we see a town under siege, and based on the discussion I've been seeing online, it's most likely the city in Rosaria. Do note at this point in time, the Iron Kingdom likely controls the city, and Dalmekia is invading. At the end of the stage is also when I think we will fight Hugo, so level-wise, this puts us around level 27. This would be after we go to the volcano. The next scene is the big blue crystal area, which we haven't seen in a little bit. Now, we see falling water and these huge towers in the background here. I again have to think that this is the water aspected crystal, which really to me means that it has to be the crystalline dominion. In my original story video, I mentioned that we are likely going here after beating Benedicta and before visiting the volcano, but honestly, I'm not positive why we go here. Maybe we're just chasing the hooded man still for revenge. The reason for us destroying the mother crystals hasn't been set yet, and based on the footage that we got recently where we have refugees heading to the crystalline dominion, I have to believe that we didn't destroy their crystal yet, so something else is going on here. The final scene has the full party of Cid, Jill, Clive, and Torgal looking out at the Imperial capital and Drake's head. Based on Clive's armor, this has to be happening after our fight with Benedicta, so I don't think that that's the same castle. Instead, it's probably just a church or something similar. Some people have also noticed that this looks similar to the FF1 opening screen. Alright, 2 trailers down. The remaining trailer I haven't talked about is the icon ability one, is more combat focused, so here I'll talk more about what is going going on and where we are about in the story based on level and my own inferences. The first scene of the third trailer has Clive, Jill, and Torgal fighting some fallen enemies. The fallen here refer to the ancient civilization, so these have to be some sort of automatons from that era that are still running. Based on the landscape and level, I'm also pretty sure we're somewhere in Dhalmekia. On the next scene, I've already talked about the Sleipnir fight in my last video, so if you haven't seen it, again, go check it out. We then have Clive again fighting in Dhalmekia, but this time he is fighting a salamander, which seems to look like a dragonkin. Here he is level 30, which again makes sense, but they obviously gave Clive, Bahamut, and Odin to show off their signature moves in particular for this scene. I wouldn't expect to have them this early. We then have Clive fighting a classic Final Fantasy enemy and Animantoys. This is level 19, and all the icons make sense. Plus, based on the scenery, it looks like we're somewhere in Rosaria, which again checks out with the level based on my plot theories. This next scene, I already talked about in my last video. The only thing I really want to note here is that I don't think we'll have Titan on this mission, as I think at the end of this mission is when we fight Hugo and probably get Titan's powers. Actually, future Thalwig here. I want to give a shout out to Heronisk, who in my last video commented that you actually see the Imperial banner on the gate in this scene. So that actually confirms that the Empire is occupying Rosaria at this point in time. Just wanted to give a little update here. We then cut to Clive doing a Titan Super on what must be the same build in the same area. Interestingly, we can see the Republic Hound in the bottom left, which again just confirms that we're fighting the Republic of Dhalmekia. The final scene of the trailer, we have a human Clive versus Ifrit scene, which I've also already talked about. I'm still not sure how this will play out in the story, but level 20 seems about right, and based on us being level 19 with the Adamantoys fight, I can rationalize that this probably takes place somewhere in Rosarian lands. Now, real quick, I'm going to talk about the old man on this slide. In older interviews, Yoshi P and I believe Takai both said that their favorite character was an old man who brought levity to the story whose name was Byron. And when they're doing their checks on the story, the scene where he's introduced still makes them cry. So he's their favorite character. In the presentation at PAX East, Yoshi P actually refers to the guy on the slide here as the lore master of the world and compares him to Koji and says he's a very important character. Based on the context of the past interviews and the fact that this is definitely an older looking man, I have to think that this must be Byron. But I guess time will tell with that. Alright, so I just want to put out there, I'm probably not going to do the fourth trail at all because I went over all of that in my last video. So the final bit of cut content was actually some stuff I skimmed over in the gameplay section. So let's go there now. The stuff that I skimmed over in my last video was some of the lore text that pops up in the shop menus in the hideaway. And really, the only interesting text I think happens at Karen's Toll, the accessory shop. First, many people have already talked about the Gaia Blade, which mentions the southern continent. Personally, I think this is just them building out the world a bit to make it feel bigger, not some idea that we will actually visit the southern continent outside of maybe some DLC. In fact, in previous interviews, they talked about the world being bigger than just these two continents. So this isn't exactly something that they've been trying to keep secret either. But with that said, and that already talked about, I actually think the other blade is somewhat more interesting. The Invictus is the sword that Clive currently has equipped when he's at the shop. And the Invictus is one of 7 swords said to have been forged in the flames of Mount Drustanus. Invictus has been passed down through the generations for use by the Archduke's family and his closest shield. Archduke Elwin presented Invictus to Rodney Murrock on the day he was promoted to Lord Commander of the Ducal Army. So basically, I think there are 3 important little tidbits here. First is, it is one of the 7 swords. Hearing one of the 7 special swords to me triggers my loot senses. Maybe the 6 other blades will be part of the ultimate weapon or something like that. The second bit is the reference to Mount Drustanus. My guess is that this mountain is the home of Drake's Breath, as it would make sense for the blades to be forged in the volcano that houses the Mother Crystal. Then there's a reference to Rodney Murdoch, who appears to be the commander of the Duke's army, which is likely Rosaria's army. So this guy is basically the highest ranking general in all the land. Now, I'm wondering if this might be the blonde man we've seen through many of the trailers, who always seems to be with the Duke. Although I have my doubts the commander of the army would serve double time as the Duke's ward, but maybe. So maybe when we play the demo, if it is the first 2 hours, we might find out that his name really is Rodney. We then scroll through the belts and bracers and accessories and potions, but the flavor text does seem to be mostly that, just flavor. This is also counting the accessory gameplay bit that he did later where he's using the Defender Sword. The flavor text on that is also mostly just flavor. And so that basically covers everything that I cut. Between this video and my last video, I think I've covered pretty much every scene or slide that has relevant lore bits in it. If I missed some tiny details, let me know. I know I skipped some flavor text, but again, I really think it's more flavor than anything. The other thing I can imagine is maybe you have questions about how I know the order of events, and if you do, again, you can check out my story video that I've done previously. If I missed anything else though, please let me know. And again, here at the end, I just want to say thank you to everyone for the tremendous feedback in my last video. It did way better than I thought it would, and you guys were super supportive in the comments, and you know, it really makes me excited to make these videos knowing that someone's actually listening to me. I appreciate all of you who take time out of your lives to listen to me ramble about my theories about the footage we've seen. So if you liked the video, leave a like. If you want to hear more, feel free to subscribe. I plan on making more content, talking about my opinions on the game and random theories next time we get some footage, which will likely be this month since we're supposed to get RPG footage pretty soon. But more than anything, I hope you enjoyed and learned something during this video. I always try to find tiny details that I think maybe can surprise you and mix it in with all the more obvious stuff. If you want to hear more right now, you can check out one of the videos that's popping up on the screen. And if not, I hope you have a good day. Thanks. Bye.